When a Florida judge hit Pam Bondi with a $50,000 fine to shut her up, no one expected her next move. Within seconds of entering that courtroom, she flipped the entire situation and left everyone stunned. It wasn't the kind of case Pam Bondi ever imagined being pulled into. Not after stepping away from the legal spotlight years ago. Not after everything she'd already seen. But there she was, standing in courtroom 4B of the Hillsborough County Courthouse in Tampa, Florida, staring down a $50,000 contempt fine with her name on it. The courtroom was quiet, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was rigid, tense. You could feel it in the way no one made eye contact. Not the bailiff, not the stenographer, not even the local journalist scribbling notes by the wall. Pam stood up slowly when her name was called, adjusting the navy blazer she'd worn 100 times before. The judge didn't waste time. "This court finds you in contempt for knowingly violating a direct gag order," Judge Corbin said flatly. His tone wasn't angry. It was tired, rehearsed. "You are hereby fined $50,000 to be paid in full within 30 days. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. She just looked at him dead in the eye and said quietly, "Understood." But what made people sit up wasn't what the judge said. It was what Pam did next. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Not thick, not flashy. Just a worn manila file marked with 3 red tabs. She held it in her hand without opening it, then calmly placed it on the table in front of her. The air shifted. Everyone in that room knew what that file might contain. They'd all heard the rumors. Rumors that Pam had made serious accusations in a recent radio interview, claims that a sitting judge had silenced 2 whistleblowers in a corporate liability case. That documents had been buried. That back room. Deals had influenced rulings. It wasn't just legal drama. If true, it was career-ending. She hadn't named names on the air, but she'd hinted strongly. Enough for the judge to feel the sting. Enough for him to hit back, and now, here she was with a folder that could change everything. Judge Corbin raised an eyebrow. "Miss Bondi, do you have something you wish to submit to the court?" "I do," she said plainly. "But only if you are prepared to hear the full context." Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't loud, but it had weight. For the first time, the judge hesitated. He glanced at the clerk, then at Pam, then back at the file. "You may proceed," he said. She opened the folder with care, as if each page inside was something sacred. The first sheet was an email dated 6 months earlier, a conversation between a junior clerk and a private attorney, flagged with 3 simple words: "Client request denied." The content was dry, until you read between the lines. The next document, a deposition from a court interpreter, one who'd been quietly dismissed after raising questions about sealed testimony that had vanished from the record. And finally, a notarized affidavit, signed, dated, sworn under penalty of perjury, from a former assistant to Judge Corbin, claiming they'd been instructed to withhold a file from evidence in a major civil lawsuit involving a local hospital. Pam laid each item down one by one on the table in front of her. "I never broke the gag order," she said, "because I never discussed the case directly, but I did speak about what I saw and what I still see happening behind closed doors. The public has a right to know when the law is being twisted to serve power." The courtroom was dead quiet. You could hear the second hand on the wall clock tick. Judge Corbin didn't say a word. He just leaned back in his chair, face unreadable. 6 months earlier, no one was threatening Pam Bondi with fines. She was sipping coffee on her back porch in Clearwater Beach, watching the sun rise over the water. Semi-retired, consulting part-time, speaking here and there. She'd stepped away from the fight. That was the plan. Then she got the first call. It was from Leah Holcomb, a friend from her early days in the state attorney's office. They hadn't talked in over a year, maybe more, but the tone in Leah's voice wasn't casual. "Pam, I need you to listen to something," Leah had said. What she sent wasn't long, a voicemail just under a minute. It was muffled, recorded from another phone, but you could make out 2 voices arguing over a sealed court document. One of the voices clearly belonged to a man. The other was scared. "I told you it's not in the file anymore." "He pulled it," the woman said. "Then you didn't hear it from me," the man replied. Pam replayed it 3 times. She called Leah back. "Where'd this come from?" "I can't tell you," Leah said. "You don't want to know." Pam didn't sleep that night. The next day, she drove 2 hours inland to Winter Haven to meet Leah in person. They sat in Leah's kitchen with the blinds drawn and phones turned off. That's when Leah handed her the file, a mix of printouts and hand-scribbled notes, some of it barely legible. At the top was the name of the plaintiff, Jonas McNeil, a nurse who had sued a hospital over severe patient negligence. The case had been settled quietly last year, but according to Leah, the original complaint had included allegations against 2 senior administrators, allegations that were later erased from the record. "It's like they wiped it clean," Leah said. "The complaint we have now isn't the one he filed." Pam leaned back in her chair, staring at the paperwork. "And who presided?" Leah hesitated. "Corbin." That name hit different. Back when Pam was still working cases, Judge Corbin had a reputation, sharp, decisive, but hard to read. No nonsense, he also had connections and deep ones. Private donors, golf weekends with corporate attorneys, closed-door meetings no one questioned. Pam didn't speak for a while. When she did, it was just 2 words. "I'm digging." But she wasn't naive. She'd been warned before, a week after she made her first public comment on a small local AM radio show. She got a call from an old mentor, someone she trusted. "Pam, I know what you're doing," he said, voice low. "But this won't go the way you think. Corbin doesn't lose, he plays long. And if you keep talking, it won't just be your career they come after." "I'm not working cases," she replied. He sighed. "They don't care." She hung up and sat in silence for a long time. Pam wasn't impulsive, she didn't like chaos. Her career had been built on discipline, on knowing when to fight and when to walk away. But this felt different. There was too much rot under the surface, and people were getting hurt because no one had the guts to speak up. So she kept digging. She found a former court assistant, Denise Kramer, who'd worked in Judge Corbin's office during the McNeil case. It took 3 meetings and a lot of coaxing, but eventually Denise opened up. "He told me to refile the transcript without the 3rd deposition," Denise said. "Said it was irrelevant." "But it wasn't," Pam asked. "What was in it?" Denise hesitated. Then she whispered that the patient's death could have been prevented, and that the hospital knew. That was the moment Pam stopped asking for permission. She knew she was crossing a line. But if she stayed quiet, she'd be just another person looking the other way. So she said what she said, and within 72 hours, she was standing in a courtroom being fined for contempt. What Pam didn't expect was how quickly the machine would move to silence her, and just how far some people were willing to go to make her disappear from the narrative. The deeper Pam went, the more twisted it became. Every file she opened, every voice she tracked down seemed to point to something bigger, not just a botched case or a shady judge, but a pattern, a structure, one that had been propped up for years. The McNeil case wasn't isolated. Pam found 3 others, 2 civil, 1 criminal, where documents had been misplaced, sealed prematurely, or reworded before final entry. And in every one of them, Judge Corbin had sat on the bench. But it wasn't just him. The attorneys involved, and same firms. The clerks, quiet transfers. The settlements, always sealed. The numbers, always just enough to keep people quiet. It was like a script, and everyone played their part. Pam reached out to Jonas McNeil himself. He was hesitant, even nervous, but agreed to meet her in the back room of a small diner in Bradenton. He looked older than his 38 years, like the lawsuit had drained something out of him. "They told me I should be grateful for what I got," Jonas said, stirring his coffee. "Said it was the best I could hope for. Then they made me sign all that paperwork. Confidentiality, no interviews, no statements. I figured All right, maybe this is just how it works. Pam leaned forward. But you had more to say. He nodded slowly. The patient's name was Elijah, 15 years old. He had a seizure in the ER. They left him alone for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. I told them he needed constant observation. They ignored me. And when he died, they scrubbed the logs. Pam felt it in her gut. And you put that in the complaint? Yeah, Jonas whispered. And then it vanished. He handed her a copy of his original filing, one he wasn't supposed to keep. The differences between it and the official version were chilling. Pages restructured, names omitted, entire sections gone. And that wasn't even the worst part. Back at her house, Pam pored over the files. That's when she noticed something strange. An internal memo dated the day before Jonas filed his complaint. It referenced a settlement path and early suppression strategy. It was unsigned, but the language was unmistakable. Clinical, corporate, calculated. Whoever wrote it was close to the court, and they were planning to bury the case before it ever reached a judge. They planned this, Pam murmured. That's when it hit her. Judge Corbin wasn't just biased, he was embedded. Part of something designed to control outcomes, a system that protected institutions, erased liability, and made inconvenient truths disappear, with a pen and a quiet nod. And he wasn't acting alone. Denise confirmed it when they met again. He's got 2 people feeding him case strategies before they ever hit his docket, she said. One works for a private legal consultant in Tallahassee. The other is still on staff. Pam blinked. Still in the courthouse? Denise nodded. Still, in his ear. It sounded like a conspiracy thriller, except no one was acting. These were real people, real decisions, real harm. And the deeper Pam went, the more expansive the web became. That contempt fine? It wasn't about protocol. It was a warning shot, a message, a public slap meant to remind her who held the reins. But they'd misjudged her. Pam didn't. Scare easy. And she wasn't alone anymore. The calls started quietly, former colleagues, whispers from people who had once worked around Corbin. A paralegal pushed out after raising questions about missing exhibits. A clerk who remembered the judge signing orders before hearings began. A retired bailiff who'd once seen Corbin step into a conference room with hospital attorneys during a recess. A room no judge had any business entering. Each account added a piece to the puzzle. But none of them were willing to go public, because they'd seen what happened to people who did word traveled fast, not the whole story, just enough. Enough to make doors close. Pam noticed the shift about a week after she spoke with Jonas. Her inbox, usually full of legal invites, went silent. A scheduled talk at a law school in St. Petersburg was postponed. Then a legal panel quietly removed her name from their flyers. At first, she told herself it was coincidence. Bad timing. But when her longtime accountant called, a man she'd trusted for years, and suggested she take a step back from anything public, she knew it was coordinated. You're making people nervous, Pam, he said, voice even. You're shaking trees nobody wants shaken. I'm not in this to comfort them, she replied. Yeah, well, they've got long memories and longer reach. She hung up, but the words stuck. The next day, a journalist from a mid-sized paper in Gainesville reached out, said someone from the courthouse tipped him off, claimed Pam was chasing relevance, bitter, had an axe to grind. They're saying you're trying to dig up ghosts that don't exist, the reporter told her. Pam didn't argue. She asked one question. Did they mention the McNeil case? Silence. No, he admitted. Just vague stuff. Nothing specific. Pam sighed. Then maybe ask yourself why that call never made it to print. The fine didn't surprise her. The contempt hearing was rushed. The court clerk gave her less than 2 days' notice. No clear explanation of what rule she'd broken, just a vague claim. Her remarks interfered with the integrity of an ongoing matter. Pam showed up anyway. No lawyer, just herself, a legal pad, and a quiet calm that made a few people in the courtroom shift in their seats. Judge Corbin didn't even look at her when he read the fine aloud. "This is not a platform for personal crusades, Ms. Bondi," he said. "This is a courtroom. There are rules." "I know the rules," Pam replied. "I've followed them for 20 years. I also know when they're being twisted." He said nothing, just moved on. Pam scanned the room. The court reporter kept her eyes down. The usually friendly bailiff stood stiff, silent, and in the back row, a man she didn't recognize. Gray suit, no notes, no briefcase. He watched every move she made. Afterward, when she tried to speak to one of the attorneys who'd worked on the McNeil case, he brushed her off. "Sorry, Pam, I can't get involved," he said, eyes darting around like someone watching for a shadow. "I've got a family to feed. I'm not asking you to go on record." "Doesn't matter," he muttered. "People talk." She walked away, feeling something settle in her chest. Not fear, clarity. This wasn't about protecting reputations. It was about preserving control, and they'd torch anyone who stepped out of line. That night, back at home, Pam poured herself a glass of wine. She pulled the manila folder back onto the kitchen table, the same one she'd later carry into court. Inside were 3 new statements, all from people with something to lose. None of them wanted their names recorded, but they trusted her. 1. Note read, "If anyone can make this stick, it's you. Just be careful. They don't play fair." Pam sat with that line for a long time. She didn't know her exact next move, only that it had to be public, loud, documented. She'd already been punished for saying too much. Now the only path forward was to say more, and to do that, Pam had to go back. Back into the courtroom. Back in front of the judge who tried to silence her. Back to the place where it all started. It was raining the morning Pam returned to court. The sky hung low. Streets shimmered with puddles. Traffic on I-275 crawled into downtown Tampa. She drove alone. No assistant, no legal entourage, just a small leather case on the passenger seat. The same one she used during murder trials 2 decades earlier. Inside it, the manila folder, now updated with timelines and sworn declarations, a 3-page motion she'd written at 2:30 a.m., a formal response to the contempt fine, and a counter-motion requesting judicial review of the conduct surrounding the McNeil case. She parked far from the courthouse, ignored the private entrance, let them see her walk in. The same security guard waved her through without a word. No smile, no acknowledgement. That was fine. Pam wasn't here to be liked. Courtroom 4B was half full. A few reporters lingered near the back. One assistant state attorney sat near the front. Even Judge Corbin's wife, Frances, ever composed, unreadable, was in the second row. Pam didn't look at anyone. She walked in, set her file on the table, waited. At 10 a.m. sharp, Judge Corbin entered. "This hearing will address Ms. Bondi's formal response to the previously issued fine," he said flatly. "You may proceed." Pam stood. No notes, no laptop. Just the folder in her hands. "Your Honor," she began, voice steady, "I'm not here to dispute your authority, or this court's right to maintain order, but I am here to challenge the narrative being used to punish me for speaking the truth." She held up the folder. "What I've submitted today includes a sworn affidavit from Denise Kramer, your former court assistant, alleging improper instructions to withhold deposition transcripts. I've also provided documentation showing critical discrepancies between Jonas McNeil's original complaint and the version entered into official record." Corbin's expression didn't flicker, but a few people in the gallery leaned forward. Pam continued, "In addition, there's a notarized statement from a retired bailiff who witnessed ex parte contact between you and outside counsel during recesses in civil proceedings." She paused. "Let it hang. These are not opinions, they're facts. Recorded, reviewed, and sworn." Judge Corbin leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced. "Ms. Bondi," he said, voice calm, "what exactly is your motion here?" Pam didn't blink. "I'm requesting an immediate review of the McNeil case by an independent judicial panel, and I'm asking for a stay on the contempt fine until that review is complete." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Quiet but unmistakable, Corbin's face remained neutral, but the tension in the room shifted. "Do you have legal representation?" he asked. "No," Pam said. "I'm representing myself, and I'm fully prepared to file in federal court if this motion is denied." The threat was real, and he knew it. A long silence followed. The kind that tightens the air and makes even seasoned lawyers sit straighter. Finally, Corbin turned to the clerk. "File the motion. I'll review and issue a written response within 7 business days." Pam nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." She returned to her seat. Didn't relax. This wasn't a victory. It was a stall. A delay. They were hoping she'd blink, but Pam hadn't come to blink. When court adjourned, she gathered her things slowly, deliberately, knowing this wasn't over. Not even close. One of the junior reporters from the back row rushed over as soon as the courtroom emptied. "Miss Bondi," she said breathlessly, "was that a sworn statement from someone inside the judge's chambers?" Pam didn't answer right away. She zipped up her leather case, met the reporter's eyes. "It was real," she said. "That's all I'll say for now." The reporter scribbled fast, then bolted toward the exit, phone already dialing. Outside, the drizzle continued. Pam stood still beneath it. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated, but she felt anchored. The system wasn't used. To people like her. People who stood their ground after stepping outside the circle of protection. And this was only the beginning. What came next would test everything Pam believed. About justice, about loyalty, and whether the truth could ever stand up to power. The days that followed were slow but far from quiet. Pam didn't wait for the judge's written response. She went on the offensive. 2 days after the hearing, she sat across from a skeptical but curious Tampa Bay Times reporter. The interview started cautious, confined to what she could legally disclose. But when the reporter asked, "Are you afraid of retaliation?" Pam didn't hesitate. "No," she said. "I've already been punished. The only thing they can do now is prove me right. Or prove me wrong." That quote landed on the front page. And with it, the shift began. An anonymous email arrived the next morning from a former staffer at the clerk's office. They'd read the article. "If Denise Kramer is finally talking," the message read, "maybe it's safe for the rest of us." Attached was a scanned court memo. Redacted lines. Initials at the bottom. R.C. Roger Corbin. Pam read it 3 times. Then she printed it and placed it in the growing pile on her kitchen table. The calls kept coming. A dismissed legal intern who'd flagged a duplicate file. A court stenographer whose clean transcript was mysteriously sent back for edits. None of these stories had ever surfaced publicly. Now, Pam was piecing them together. A puzzle no one wanted solved. Still, the court remained silent. 7 business days passed. Then 8. Then 10. On the 11th day, a courier knocked on her door. The envelope was thin. Pam opened it slowly. Motion for review. Denied. Fine. Upheld. No explanation, no footnotes. Just a single signature at the bottom. Roger C. Corbin. She sat on the edge of her couch staring at the sentence. Not because she didn't understand it, but because she understood it perfectly. They weren't backing down, so neither would she. That evening, Pam stood outside the courthouse. Press conference, 30 people maybe. Enough. "I submitted sworn affidavits," she said calmly. "Deposition inconsistencies, documented interference in case proceedings. None of it was addressed in the denial." She held up the denial letter. "This isn't about revenge. It's not even about one judge. It's about whether our courts answer to truth, or just to themselves." She folded the letter, slipped it into her folder. "I'll be appealing this decision in federal court, and if anyone else out there has been pressured into silence, now's your moment." No theatrics, no raised voice, just gravity. People felt it. That night, a clip of her statement made the rounds online. No viral explosion, just enough. By morning, 3 national legal blogs had picked it up. A retired judge in California tweeted, "If even half of what she's alleging is true, this demands urgent review." A podcast host in Austin reached out for an interview. Pam wasn't just a lone voice in Tampa anymore. She was a spark. And Judge Corbin? He finally blinked. 2 days later, the Florida Judicial Qualifications Commission quietly announced an internal review of Corbin's recent case history. No timeline, no details, just a single sentence. A review has been opened. Pam read it 3 times. Not from disbelief, but because the truth had finally echoed loud enough to get through the walls built to keep it out. She didn't celebrate, didn't send emails. She just texted Denise. They blinked. We keep going. Because even with the door cracking open, Pam knew one thing with certainty. This fight was far from over. The headlines faded as they always do. Within 2 weeks, the media had moved on. Back to politics, weather alerts, and celebrity flameouts. That's just how news cycles work. But Pam wasn't chasing headlines. She was chasing something harder to catch, something heavier, accountability. But something had shifted. And not just for Pam. She was back in Clearwater, barefoot on the beach, walking along the shoreline in the pale morning light when her phone rang. Leah Holcomb, the same friend who had handed her that very first file. They hadn't spoken in a few days. "You saw the update?" Leah asked. "I did," Pam said. "They're assigning a review panel from outside the state." Pam paused, her toes pressing into damp sand. "Good," she said. "That's what it should have been from the beginning." There was a silence, warm and stretched. Then Leah said softly, "I don't know how you kept going. Most people would have just paid the fine and disappeared." Pam looked out across the calm water, the horizon blurring into mist. Her voice was steady. "Because if I let it go, that would have meant I agreed with it, and I couldn't live with that. It wasn't about ego, wasn't about pride. It was about the cost of silence, especially from people who should know better. Because when someone inside the system stays quiet, for comfort, for convenience, that silence spreads, and what it touches, it rots." That was the lesson Pam had come to understand. Maybe too late, maybe right on time. She'd always believed in the law, its structure, its promise. But this had reminded her of something harder. When power is left unchecked, it stops protecting people. It starts protecting itself. What saved her wasn't the law. It was the people who had finally stopped being quiet. Denise, Jonas, Leah, the clerk who sent that anonymous email, the bailiff, the paralegal. Every one of them had something to lose. And they spoke anyway. Because of them, Pam hadn't stood alone. There was no press tour, no resignation from Judge Corbin. Not yet. But the Florida JQC investigation was real. The paper trail was growing, and people were paying attention. Not everyone, but enough. Pam returned to her consulting work. No cameras, no lawsuits, just the rhythm she'd missed. Some mornings she still checked the court's docket out of habit. Old reflexes die slow. Then, one quiet afternoon, an envelope arrived. No return address, just her name written in careful cursive. Inside was a single note. "I was one of the jurors in the McNeil case. We never saw the real file. I remember wondering why. Thank you for not letting it slide." No name, no signature, just that. Pam folded the note and placed it next to her case folder. Some battles don't end in headlines. They end in a quiet moment like that. A flicker of truth landing exactly where it's needed. A reminder that she hadn't let fear win. She used to tell law students, "Your reputation won't be built on how many cases you win. It'll be built on how many truths you don't run from." Now she believed it more than ever, because this wasn't just about calling out corruption. It was about reminding people, one voice anchored in truth still matters, even when the room doesn't want to hear it, especially when it costs you. Pam Bondi had been told to sit down, to stay quiet, to accept the fine and move on. Instead, she stood up. and she held the system to its own rules. The consequences were real. But so was the impact. So if you ever find yourself being told to back down, to stay silent for the sake of comfort or control, ask yourself, what happens if you don't?